The Sedevacantists believe that the mere external violation of the law incurs ipso facto excommunication, without taking into consideration the delinquent's personal culpability, finds little support in the theological or canonical literature. In the words of Cardinal Louis Bellot, it would be quite absurd to place material heretics outside of the Church. The reason why we find notable theologians placing material heretics outside of the Church is because the phrase material heretics has historically been applied to those outside of visible communion with the Church, for example, Protestants. This is evident from the full context of Cardinal Louis Bellot's full remarks. To quote him directly, heretics are divided into formal and material. Formal heretics are those to whom the authority of the Church is sufficiently known, while material heretics are those who, being in invincible ignorance of the Church herself, in good faith choose some other guiding rule. For if you understand by the expression material heretic, one who, while professing subjection to the Church's magisterium in matters of faith, nevertheless still denies something defined by the Church, because he did not know it was defined, or by the same token holds an opinion opposed to Catholic doctrine, because he falsely thinks that the Church teaches it, it would be quite absurd to place material heretics outside of the true Church. But on this understanding, the legitimate use of the expression would entirely be perverted. For a material sin is said to exist only when what belongs to the nature of the sin takes place materially, but without advertence or deliberate will. By the nature of heresy consists in withdrawal from the rule of the ecclesiastical magisterium. Although St. Robert Bellarmine never uses the exact terminology, he definitely employs the principal distinction between formal and material heretics. For example, in his treatise on the Church Militant, Bellarmine uses the example of Catholic bishops during the Arian crisis who denied that Christ was homoousios, or consubstantial, with the Father on account of ignorance of the meaning of the term. For example, Bellarmine writes, "To that passage of Jerome I respond. There are two figures in his words. One of understanding when he says, the world groaned, for he calls the world a great part of the world, but not the whole world. The second of abuse when he says, and marveled to find itself Arian, for he calls the Arians improperly those who subscribe to heresy through ignorance. He speaks on that multitude of bishops who throughout the world agreed with Arminius, and being deceived by the Arians, decree that the term homoousios, consubstantial, must be abolished, even though they did not know what it meant. Certainly they were not heretics, nor did they err at least materially, just as if some Catholic might advance a blasphemous opinion externally, with the tongue thinking it is a pious prayer. Such a man would not probably be a blasphemer. For that reason, the same bishops, as they were admonished and recognized the fallacy, immediately corrected their error, and with tears did penance for the blasphemy, even though it was only advanced by the tongue, and it seemed that the whole world marveled and groaned to find itself Arian. The phrase, nor did they err at least materially, is difficult to interpret. Using Cardinal Bellot's distinction, we might say these bishops had not committed the sin of heresy, even materially, because they had not withdrawn from the rule of the ecclesiastical magisterium. However, the particular instance of whether these bishops erred materially is tangential to my main argument, that Bellarmine draws a sharp distinction between material and formal heresy in the section quoted above. To quote two specific passages that illustrate my point, for he calls those Arians improperly those who subscribe to heresy through ignorance, and, just as if some Catholic might advance a blasphemous opinion externally with the tongue, thinking it is a pious prayer. There are also other passages in Bellarmine's writing where he explicitly denies that material heretics are excluded from the body of the Church. For example, in the case of Pope Marcellinus, Bellarmine writes, "Still, I believe that he would not have fallen from the pontificate ipso facto, because it was certain to all that he sacrificed to idols only out of fear." Finally, in the second book of the first volume of his treatise on the Roman Pontiff, Bellarmine writes, "The first is of Albert Pagaeus, who contends that the Pope cannot be a heretic and hence would not be deposed. In any case, such opinion is probable and can easily be defended, as we will show in its proper place. Still, because it is not certain, and the common opinion is to the contrary, it would be worth while to see what the response should be if the Pope could be a heretic." Contrary to popular belief, Pagaeus' view was not that a Pope could not teach heresy publicly, but that he would never become a pertinacious heretic. This view was also held by St. Robert Bellarmine. In the fourth book of the second volume, Bellarmine writes, "It is probable, and may piously be believed, that not only as Pope can the Supreme Pontiff not err, but he cannot be a heretic even as a particular person by pertinaciously believing something false against the faith. This is despite stating that all Catholics and heretics agree that a Pope can err as a private teacher." He writes in the same book, "All Catholics and heretics agree that the Pope can err as a private teacher from ignorance, even in the universal questions of law concerning both faith and morals, just as what happens to other teachers." It should be noted that Bellarmine says that all Catholics agree that a Pope can fall into heresy as a private teacher, despite adhering to Pagaeus' view that a Pope can never be deposed for heresy. The only way to reconcile these two passages is by drawing a distinction between formal and material heresy. However, two clarifications need to be made. First, when Bellarmine says that a Pope can err through ignorance, he is referring to heresy properly speaking, and not some lesser degree of theological error. This is evident from the full context of his remarks. Second, the phrase private teacher extends to the Pope's official teaching capacity, and not merely his private theological opinions. This is evident from Bellarmine's response to the case of Popes Nicholas and Honorius. For example, regarding the case of Nicholas, he says, where he uses the exact phrase private teacher, "I respond, Nicholas was not defending a question on faith when he spoke, rather he only expressed his opinion in passing as a private teacher." In this context, Pope Nicholas was responding to several questions sent by unidentified Bulgarians in his official capacity, although he didn't define anything definitively. Likewise, in the case of Honorius, Bellarmine writes, "You might say, but certainly these councils believe that the Pope could err. I respond, these fathers only believe that the Pope could err as a private man, which is a probable opinion, although the contrary seems more probable to us. This is all that Honorius is accused of, that he fostered heresy in private letters." He uses the phrase private letters despite the fact that the two letters of Honorius were sent in the Pope's official capacity, since Sergius appealed to him to resolve a theological dispute between the patriarchates of Constantinople, Jerusalem, and Alexandria, of which he sent 3 letters. Later, both Sergius and Paul of Constantinople appealed to his authority to defend their doctrine.